for the West for Cordis. And so we're going to spend some time this morning, a short amount of time just discussing the Cordis portfolio overall, but the majority of our time is going to be focused on our interventional cardiology portfolio and specifically some of the newer devices that we've recently launched to the U.S. marketplace, including drug-eluting stents. So with that, I will, as Justin said, I'll spend about 20 minutes with my presentation, then we'll have time left over for questions and answers. So with Cordis, our product categories essentially break down into three separate buckets. The first bucket would be access products, and so access to us means things like sheaths and guide catheters, diagnostic catheters, and those sorts of products. Intervention is the second category, and that's looking at products like stents, balloons, guide wires, and more, interventional types of devices. And then the third category is vascular closure. So our company offers the NIRx closure device, and it's one of the market leaders in the vascular closure space. So you could also break it down a little bit further into endovascular and interventional cardiology. A lot of similar product categories in each bucket. On the interventional cardiology side, I've bolded the products that we're going to be focusing on today. So these are some of our newer entrances into the market. So our drug-eluting stents, bare metal stents, coronary balloons, and a unique product called Tryton, which is a bifurcation stent. One of the things that Cordis is doing right now, and we are under the Cardinal umbrella, one of the things that we're doing that's, I think, different than the three main manufacturers of drug-eluting stents and structural heart products, Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston, is we're bringing new technologies to market relatively quickly and filling gaps in our interventional cardiology portfolio by creating distribution partnerships with various companies across the world that need a U.S. sales organization. So the company that manufactures our coronary balloons is a company called Merrill, based out of India. They're a market leader in interventional cardiology in India and Europe. Tryton is the company that manufactures the Tryton bifurcation stent. And Mednol is a company that we've recently partnered with for the long term for coronary drug-eluting stents and bare metal stents, and that offering is going to continue to expand. So when we look at the coronary balloons, we've got a full line of compliant and non-compliant balloons, and they've got some significant benefits over the coronary balloons that are available today. They're more pushable. We have longer sizes than the other devices that are available from the big three. And there are a number of other kind of technical benefits to the coronary balloons as well. And the reason I bring this up is because a lot of times when we're talking about drug-eluting stents, often coronary balloons also come into the conversation. So we've got a full line of coronary balloons. The Tryton side branch coronary stent, again, is a unique product. It's a device that isn't available and a technology that isn't available from the other coronary stent manufacturers. And it's uniquely designed to treat really difficult types of anatomy, which is bifurcations. There are many different techniques that interventional cardiologists use to treat bifurcation lesions, but they all today involve a two-stent strategy if they're going to stent in the side branch. And with the Tryton stent, it gives you much more predictability when you're treating the side branch. So there's a visual graphic on the screen right now that shows what the Tryton stent looks like after it's deployed. And essentially you can see in the side branch there's scaffolding there that holds open the side branch. And then in the main branch, what you do is you put a drug-eluting stent through the Tryton and cover the main branch with the drug-eluting stent. So it's a combination of one drug-eluting stent and the Tryton stent. And there have been very, very positive outcomes in terms of procedural outcomes. It's much more predictable, much easier to do than the typical bifurcation strategy. And then the data on Tryton is very good as well. The 2-year data is very good. We've got TLR rate that ranges from 1.5% to 4.8%. So this technology has done really well for us. We launched it actually before we launched our drug-eluting stent, so that was a little bit of a challenge just because it was kind of just a one-off offering. But now that we've got drug-eluting stents, bare metal stents, and coronary balloons, the Tryton fits in much better. As our people are in the labs training on our other technologies, they can also train physicians and staff on the Tryton. Next up is the NIRxCell bare metal stent. This bare metal stent is manufactured by Medinol. It's the same company that manufactures our drug-eluting stent. And NIRxCell has been on the market in the United States for a number of years. As you all probably know, bare metal stents is a very small percentage of interventional cardiology stenting now. It's somewhere between 5 and 10%, maybe even a little less than that, depending on the facility. So most facilities are using primarily drug-eluting stents, but you need a bare metal stent in order to round out that portfolio. And there are certain cases where physicians feel like it's safer for patients to have a bare metal stent. So this NIRxCell technology has the same stent design, same deployment system as our drug-eluting stent. It simply doesn't have a drug. So why is Cordis entering the drug-eluting stent space? And I'm sure for folks who have been in the healthcare marketplace for a decent period of time, there was a point in time where Cordis was the lead innovator in drug-eluting stents and the #1 market share provider for drug-eluting stents. Cordis as an organization, when Cordis was a part of Johnson & Johnson, actually exited the drug-eluting stent market 7 or 8 years ago. And so since then, we've been without a drug-eluting stent. Since the acquisition by Cardinal Health, one of the primary objectives of Cardinal was to get Cordis back into the drug-eluting stent space. And it's because it's a large market. It's a $1.2 billion market in the United States. There are 3 manufacturers who dominate the market. They're the only 3 manufacturers that are on the market today besides us, as you all know. And they split market share relatively equally between the 3. Drug-eluting stents have become more commoditized over time, and ASPs have come down over time. But it's still a physician preference item, and it's relationship-driven in a lot of ways. So knowing that, we know that we have to have a good, strong pricing and contracting strategy to address the commoditization piece, but we also have to have a strong sales force to help convince physicians and lab staff that this is the right drug-eluting stent for them. So with that, we hired an additional 45 sales representatives earlier this year, actually last year, and a lot of those folks come out of cath labs, so they've got good clinical experience. We have a total of over 200 salespeople in the field today, and so we've got good support from that perspective. The Cordis drug-eluting stent is, and I'm going to go into the data just briefly, but it's clinically equivalent to the other devices that are on the market today. And for those of you who are familiar with the data on drug-eluting stents, it's gotten to a place where the outcomes are so good with drug-eluting stents that it's difficult to improve upon outcomes, at least in a statistically significant way, without having a study that has 20,000 patients in it. But it's obviously extremely important to prove that your device is clinically equivalent and clinically acceptable. And our stent definitely meets that requirement. It's highly deliverable, which is important from the physician's perspective. When you have devices that are so close to each other in terms of outcomes, a lot of the decision-making then becomes procedurally, which is the easiest to use and which has the most success in difficult lesions. So it's highly deliverable, and it's safe and effective. So this is the EluNIR stent. It has a drug called retafurolimus, and so it's an Olamus drug. And all of the stents from Medtronic, Abbott, and Boston also have an Olamus drug, so it's a proven, safe, effective drug. To get FDA approval, we created a robust clinical program with over 2,200 patients, and I'll go into those results. We actually just launched the 2-year data at the CRT conference in Washington, D.C. a couple of weeks ago, and it was very, very positive for EluNIR. Some of the things that are different about the stent, it's got a unique manufacturing process, and we'll talk about that and why that's important. It's got a different cell design, and it's a big improvement over what's available today. And it's the first elastomeric polymer drug-eluting stent, which provides some safety components and differentiates it from the other devices that are on the market. It also has a distinct delivery system, and I'll talk about that and why that's important. So the first thing is the manufacturing process. The stents are actually manufactured on a flat sheet. And if you think about the way most drug-eluting stents are manufactured today, it's a cylindrical metal that is laser cut, and so that's how they're manufactured. With this, it's different. They're manufactured on a flat sheet, still laser cut, but you can make many more drug-eluting stents at a faster rate by doing it on a flat sheet. Also, the real benefit of it clinically is that you can really ensure uniform application of the drug and of the polymer if it's on a flat sheet versus a cylinder. And if you think about like spray painting, if you spray painted like a cylindrical piece of wood, for example, you know that when you're spray painting something, you don't get uniform coverage of a cylinder. You try to go from the right distance from the cylinder, and you try to spray as uniformly as you can, but you're going to get an incomplete and inconsistent coverage there. And it's the same with drug-eluting stents. So when they're applying the polymer and applying the drug, you're really unable to get a consistent application of the polymer and drug without it being on a flat sheet. So that's one of the things that's unique about this, and that's one of the reasons why we feel like we're getting numerically better results than the competition in the clinical studies that are being published. It also has a different coating, as I mentioned, so the elastomeric polymer is something that is unique, and we think that it provides us a better safety profile for the drug-eluting stent because there's less opportunity for the polymer to crack. And when you think about that, if you have a polymer that's not uniformly applied and it's not an elastic type of material, and you do get little micro tears in the polymer, it creates an opportunity for thrombosis to form. And so by having this uniform elastomeric polymer, there are some really big advantages to that in terms of safety profile and healing. And then finally, the spring tip of the delivery system. So this is not the stent itself, it's the delivery system that the stent is on. We have a spring tip on the delivery system that allows you to navigate really difficult lesions, whether they're heavily calcified lesions or tortuous vessels, because of the metal spring tip that's on the delivery system. Every other manufacturer has a plastic tip, and so you can see really easily, visually, when a physician has difficulty getting a stent through a heavily calcified lesion or a highly tortuous vessel, then they have to apply a fair amount of pressure to the delivery system. When they remove the delivery system, whether or not they were able to deploy the stent, you can see that the plastic tip often has significant damage to it. And so it just makes it more difficult to deliver the stent in complex lesions. So the spring tip is a big advantage because it gives you better deliverability. So it's important for all of us as we're trying to convince physicians that this is the right technology for them to prove that clinically this is a high-quality product with enough clinical evidence to support our claims that it's clinically acceptable and in some cases even clinically superior to the competition. So this is the study that was a pivotal trial for FDA approval in the United States was called the BIONICS trial. And as I mentioned, we just released the 2-year outcomes at the CRT conference in Washington, D.C. So I'm just going to explain this really quickly, and then at the end of the call, if there are questions on the data, I can address that. One of the things that's interesting about this study, since it's a pivotal FDA approval study, Medinol didn't necessarily have to use the patient population that they did in the protocol that they put together for the study, but they decided to make this a very challenging study and a very challenging patient population. So they did what's called a more-comers study, and that means that they took patients, they enrolled patients with STEMIs, they enrolled patients with CTOs, saphenous vein grafts, and other heavily calcified lesions. There's a high percentage of diabetic patients in the study as well. So it was very close to a real-world patient population, much more so than most studies that are published today. So it was a challenging patient population, and what's so interesting about this is that the outcomes are so good in such a challenging patient population. So they looked at target lesion failure and composite of cardiac death, target vessel MI, and ischemia-driven target lesion revascularization as their primary endpoints. They looked at that at 12 months. And then their secondary endpoints were MACE target vessel failure, and also definite and probable stent thrombosis and procedural success. And so the 12-month data was published and presented last year at TCT, and the 2-year data was just presented and published at CRT in Washington, D.C. a couple weeks ago. And so this is what they found. And you can see from the patient population, it was a total of 1,900 patients, equally split between EluNIR and the Medtronic Resolute stent. So when we look at target lesion failure, you can see that at 2 years, the event rates are very similar to each other. And for the folks on the phone who don't have a lot of experience with clinical data for drug-eluting stents, this is a very low target lesion failure rate. So that's a very positive sign. Also, stent thrombosis is a really important outcome to look at with drug-eluting stents. And you can see that at 2 years, the stent thrombosis rate for EluNIR was 0.5% versus 1% for the Medtronic Resolute. Statistically similar, but numerically better. And one of the things that's interesting about this is that there was only 1 stent thrombosis after 30 days for EluNIR, which is fantastic. So the conclusions of the trial you can read here on the screen, but a couple that I'd like to point out is that EluNIR was non-inferior to Resolute at 1 year and 2 years in this morecomers population. The TLF rate at 2 years was statistically similar as well, and a very low stent thrombosis rate with 1 event beyond 30 days. And so the bottom line is that the 2-year outcomes continue to support the safety and efficacy of EluNIR, and it's representative of real-world practice. So we feel very excited about this data, and the interventional cardiology community was also very excited at CRT. It's something that a lot of folks are talking about right now. So how is Cordis going to establish ourselves in this space, and how are we going to bring value to your hospitals? You know, it's a well-established space with well-established competitors with relatively equal market share, and those 3 companies have been doing business in a similar way for a fair amount of time. As I mentioned before, the average selling price of drug-eluting stents has come down considerably, just even in the past year or two, due to competitive pressures, and it's going to continue with us entering the marketplace. We provide another option for hospitals, and we have the opportunity to potentially really disrupt the marketplace. So our first objective, excuse me, our first objective is to get as many drug-eluting stent and coronary balloon evaluations as possible. The data is great, and it's important that we have a lot of high-profile interventional cardiologists that support the use of our product, but we still have to get the real-world experience, and every interventional cardiologist is going to want to try it for themselves before they agree to put it on the shelf. And it's no different for the folks in supply chain. It's very difficult to agree to commit to a new drug-eluting stent without obviously knowing that it works first and that it's been used in your hospitals. So the key thing for us is getting evaluations set up in a way that we know what the outcomes are that we're looking for, and if we meet those outcomes, then we have a next step in terms of contracting and getting on the shelf. And we really have to get clinical acceptance, but the goal for us, at least over the next 6 months to a year, is just to develop a footprint in the U.S. marketplace. We would like to have a very aggressive goal of getting our share of the market in a short amount of time. So that, you know, if we could get to 25% market share, that would be fantastic, but we also have to be realistic about the timing of this and just how easy or how difficult it is to penetrate this market. So the key thing, first off, is to get evaluations, gain clinical acceptance, get on the shelf at as many facilities as we possibly can, and provide good pricing so that there's an incentive to do that. We also need strong GPO and IDN contract positions, and we're absolutely working on that. So that's a key component for us. And then eventually we can get to more committed contracting. And once we have clinical acceptance and we're on the shelf, as we're looking to provide greater incentives for hospitals to use more of our drug-eluting stents, we can provide additional incentives in exchange for market share commitment or usage commitments. We're obviously going to be looking, we'd have a very difficult time competing in this market without offering cost savings. So we're well aware of that, and we've been very flexible with our pricing strategy thus far. When we looked at this market a year ago, we had an idea of what our average selling price would be, and now here we are a year later, and it's definitely different because the prices have come down. But we're ready to compete in this space, and we're looking for opportunities to partner with hospitals that want to partner with Cardinal Health and partner with Cordis in driving cost savings initiatives in this category. We're also committed to clinical research. So the BIONICS trial was very important, but we're going to be launching several new clinical studies over the next couple of months that continue to round out the clinical data that we have, and we'll be looking at different challenging patient populations to help try to separate our technology from the competition. And we would have a difficult time really competing in this space over the long term if we didn't have a strong pipeline and a plan for innovation. And so there are a number of different technologies that we'll be coming to market with that are focused on endovascular, others in coronary, others in closure, but coronary specifically, since drug-eluting stents are coronary-specific products, we've got a very full pipeline of devices that we're going to be bringing to market. Some are focused on next-generation drug-eluting stents, and others are focused on ancillary devices that help round out the bag, including radial access products, fractional flow reserve, or FFR, and then other technologies as well. We're probably not going to be getting into structural heart in the short term, but over time, we will look at that category as well. My last slide here is about value. And so we have a number of different programs outside of simple pricing that we can offer in order to provide an incentive to have a fair amount of market share in your facilities. The first we call savings for growth. And so we're able to put programs together that provide rebate incentives or end-of-stock pricing incentives for achieving growth targets specifically with the Cordis product portfolio, or we can make it specific to drug-eluting stents and balloons. But then also the bigger overlay program is with Cardinal Health as a whole. So for your organizations that do a fair amount of business with Cardinal Health, as you all know, Cardinal is a large company with a large footprint, much larger than Medtronic, Boston Scientific, or Abbott. And so there are ways for us to leverage that spend in order to provide additional value on the drug-eluting stent product portfolio and really provide an additional incentive for Cardinal Health as a whole to deliver cost savings to your facilities, and then also look at different categories that Cardinal offers and have those all sort of wrapped together. So you know, we're looking to advance your facilities. If you have a Cardinal 360 program today or some variation of the Cardinal 360 program, there are ways that we could accelerate that program and potentially get your facility to the next tier of the Cardinal 360 program if our drug-eluting stents are brought in, even if that doesn't necessarily mean that you're reaching the financial objective of the next tier. So we created essentially accelerators with our drug-eluting stents. So those are some of the pieces of value that we bring in terms of creative contracting outside of just simple pricing. So with that, I'm not sure where we are on the 20-minute timeline, but I feel like I at least kept it to 20 minutes or a little bit less. I'd like to open it up to the group now and see what sorts of questions